Welcome back to Redacted Frequencies, everyone. It's Cypher here, as always, ready to pull back the curtain on another truly fascinating, almost unbelievable story.
And Echo, right here beside him, ready to delve into what I think is going to be one of our most, unsettling topics yet. You know, when we talk about things being redacted, this one feels like it was hidden in plain sight for so long.
Absolutely, Echo. I mean, today, we're not just discussing a secret society or a hidden agenda in the traditional sense. We're actually going to be exploring the incredible and frankly kind of shocking transformation of what started out as, a seemingly ordinary religious institution, a local church even, that somehow evolved into this vast, sprawling global intelligence network.
Yeah, it's wild to think about. I mean, a church operating as an intelligence hub? It really forces you to re-examine the very definition of what these organizations are. We're talking about a complete dual identity here. Faith on one hand and, espionage on the other. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. How did this happen? What was the structure that allowed it? We're going to dive deep into its origins, how it expanded, and then, of course, the actual operations it undertook. We've got some really intriguing details coming up about how they, managed to blend right in to foreign societies.
So get ready to question everything you thought you knew about traditional institutions. This is Redacted Frequencies, and we're about to explore the church's secret identity. Stick around.
So, Echo, picking up right where we left off, I mean, we're talking about a church, right? A seemingly normal spiritual movement. But it didn't stay normal, did it? How does something like that, a local church, even begin to morph into something globally significant, let alone an intelligence network?
It's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because you think of a local church, you think of, community, worship, maybe a bake sale. But this document, it really highlights how its initial spiritual drive was just incredibly powerful. It allowed it to expand beyond its immediate locality at a pace that was, frankly, quite unprecedented.
Yeah, like it wasn't just, we're building another church down the street. It was a deliberate, strategic expansion, almost like, a corporate rollout or something. They had this vision and they executed on it globally.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about converting people, although that was, obviously a stated goal. The key here, and what really becomes startling, is how its structure evolved. It wasn't just sending out pastors.
No, it wasn't, because when you think about it, a traditional church, you're building physical churches, you're establishing congregations. This went beyond that. It was about creating a presence, a human presence.
Right. And this is where it starts to get really, really clever, or perhaps, depending on your perspective, really insidious. They built these extensive networks, but not just of traditional clergy. They were missionaries, yes, but also aid workers, and get this, cultural attachés.
Oh, see, cultural attachés is where the ears really perk up, isn't it? Because that immediately sounds like something that has a diplomatic or, maybe even an intelligence connotation. It's not just about spreading the word anymore, is it?
No, it's not. And the genius, if we can call it that, was in the blend. The fact that these individuals, whether they were missionaries providing spiritual guidance or aid workers delivering much needed humanitarian assistance, were inherently trusted. They were seen as benevolent forces.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a local community struggling with poverty or natural disaster, and a group comes in offering genuine help, you're going to open your doors. You're going to trust them. You're going to share your stories, your needs, everything.
Precisely. And that trust, that seamless blending into foreign societies, that's what made them so effective, not just as a religious body, but as what the document describes as a hub for intelligence gathering. I mean, it's like a Trojan horse almost.
A spiritual Trojan horse. Wow. And it makes so much sense because if you're a spy or an intelligence operative, your biggest challenge is always gaining access and building trust. Who better to do that than someone seemingly there for altruistic reasons?
Uh-huh. And they weren't just like dropping in for a week and leaving. These were long-term deployments, people embedding themselves, learning languages, understanding local customs, becoming part of the fabric of these communities. So over time, their access and their understanding would have become incredibly deep.
Yeah, it's funny. We often think of intelligence as trench coats and dark alleys or, high-tech satellites. But some of the most effective intelligence is just, a conversation over a cup of tea, if you will. And these networks facilitated exactly that.
Absolutely. And the document really emphasizes how the church's core mission of expansion provided the perfect, almost impenetrable cover. They weren't raising suspicion because they were doing what a church is supposed to do: grow, help people, spread its message.
So it was less about specific covert training from the get-go for these individuals and more about, here's a framework that allows you to operate globally, gain trust, and oh, by the way, if you happen to pick up some useful information along the way.
Well, I think we'll get into the happen to pick up part a little more in our next segment. But yeah, the framework was absolutely key. It provided the infrastructure, the ability to place people in key regions, often in places where traditional intelligence agencies might struggle to establish a foothold. Think about it. Conflict zones, politically sensitive areas, places where, official government presence might be viewed with immediate suspicion.
Right. A missionary or an aid worker, on the other hand, often seen as neutral, helpful. It's brilliant in its simplicity almost, and this expansion, this global footprint just created so many avenues for information flow.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it flips the script on what we typically associate with espionage. It leverages inherent goodwill and trust and transforms what should be a purely benevolent endeavor into something with a very, very different secondary function.
So, the takeaway from this first dive really is that this church's global expansion wasn't just about spiritual growth. It was almost by design building a vast, interconnected human network that was perfectly positioned to gather intelligence, all under the most innocuous and, frankly, trusted guise imaginable.
Exactly. And it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about next, which is how these benign seeming operations like providing charity or education actually served as a very effective front.
Okay, so Echo, that brings us perfectly to our next point. If this global network of missionaries, aid workers, and cultural attachés was so effective at blending in and gaining trust, what exactly were they doing beneath that robe of altruism? I mean, how did these seemingly benign activities like charity or education actually serve as a front for intelligence operations?
Well, that's where it gets truly chilling, I think, for some people, because you have these groups affiliated with the church going into communities, often very vulnerable ones, offering genuine assistance. They're providing medical aid, setting up schools, distributing food, doing what we'd all consider incredibly good work.
And people are grateful. They're opening their homes, their hearts, their entire lives to these individuals. There's no suspicion.
Exactly. The trust factor is just off the charts. And that's the genius, right? Or again, the deeply unsettling part. Because under this guise of doing good, these church-affiliated groups were operating as, quote, covert collectors of political, social, and economic intelligence.
Wow. So it wasn't just, oh, we're here to help. It was, we're here to help, and also, what's the local government up to? Are there any dissident movements forming? What's the economic situation really like in this region? That kind of thing?
Precisely that. They were mapping out the landscape, politically, socially, economically. Imagine you're an aid worker, spending months or years in a remote village. You're teaching the children, you're helping with crop yields, you're, perhaps mediating local disputes. You become indispensable.
And privy to everything. People talked to you. They complained about the government. They discussed their hopes, their fears, things they would never, ever share with an official or someone they even remotely suspected of having like a hidden agenda.
Absolutely. And the document really hammers this home. Their access was, quote, unparalleled due to the trust they gained. Think about it. A traditional spy might have to break into offices or, try to recruit assets. These individuals had information brought to them, often unsolicited, because they were seen as trusted confidants.
So it's not like they were, planting bugs or anything overtly spy-like in the traditional sense. It was more about deep observation, listening, and just, I guess, collecting ambient intelligence. Information that was just flowing around them because of their trusted position.
Yeah, it's a much more subtle form of intelligence gathering, but arguably far more effective in many contexts. They weren't just looking for, top secret government documents. They were interested in, the pulse of the community. What were the social dynamics? Were there any signs of unrest? What was the general sentiment towards, let's say, foreign powers or even, regional powers?
And this isn't just like a random bit of overheard gossip, right? These members were actually presumably tasked with reporting on these things. Like it says they reported on local governments, opposition movements, and sensitive infrastructure. That sounds very deliberate.
It does, doesn't it? It suggests a structured reporting mechanism. It wasn't just, keeping a diary of interesting observations. It implies that there were specific interests, specific targets for information. And the fact that they were embedded within these communities, they could identify, key figures in opposition movements, understand their networks. They could assess the stability of a critical infrastructure just by observing everyday life. So let's say a particular bridge or a power plant. They're not necessarily going there to sabotage it, but they can report back, hey, this thing is falling apart or it's a critical choke point for the local economy. That's incredibly valuable for, anyone interested in the stability or vulnerability of a region.
Exactly. Or even, there's a lot of discontent among the workers at this particular factory, which could indicate a potential for strikes or larger social unrest. These are all pieces of the puzzle that governments or intelligence agencies would absolutely want to have.
And they're getting it from people who are effectively above suspicion. I mean, who suspects a doctor setting up a clinic or a teacher establishing a school? It's the perfect cover.
It is the perfect cover, and it also highlights the long game that was being played here. This wasn't about quick hits or, immediate high-value targets. This was about building a comprehensive understanding of regions, often over years. That kind of deep, granular intelligence is incredibly difficult to acquire through traditional means.
Yeah, I mean, you can't parachute in a spy and expect them to gain that level of insight and trust in a few weeks. But a humanitarian worker, a missionary, they're there for the long haul. And that rapport builds naturally, almost inevitably.
Mm-hmm. And it's also worth noting the types of information: political, social, economic. That really covers the full spectrum of what any state intelligence agency would be interested in. It's about understanding the entire fabric of a society, not just like military movements.
So it's not just about hard intelligence, but soft intelligence, if you will. The kind of subtle shifts in public opinion, the undercurrents of discontent, the emerging leaders, or even just the weaknesses in the local economy that could be exploited.
Yes, absolutely. It's often that soft intelligence that can give you a more complete picture, a more nuanced understanding of a situation than just, satellite imagery or intercepted communications. It gives you the human element.
And the fact that the church could provide this infrastructure, this network of unwitting or perhaps witting, depending on the level, intelligence gatherers, must have been incredibly appealing to state actors. I mean, they didn't have to build it themselves.
No, they didn't. And that's where we start to see the threads connecting to actual state security services. Because if you're a government and you see this organization with unparalleled access and trust in regions critical to your national interests, you're going to want to tap into that, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's like finding a pre-built intelligence network operating openly under the guise of benevolence. It's a gold mine.
It really is. And it makes you wonder about the ethical lines, too, because on one hand, these people are doing genuinely good work. They are providing aid. They are educating. But then there's this underlying, very specific function that is entirely separate from their stated mission.
Yeah, the dual identity. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, honestly, because you want to believe in the purity of humanitarian efforts, but this suggests that even those can be compromised.
And the trust that's leveraged there, that's the powerful part, because that trust is hard-won, and if it's then used for purposes other than pure humanitarianism, it raises some serious questions about, the future of such endeavors.
Right, because if communities start to suspect that aid workers are actually gathering intelligence, then that well of trust dries up instantly, and then nobody gets help.
Exactly. So what we're seeing here is this incredibly effective, almost insidious mechanism for intelligence gathering that relies entirely on perceived benevolence.
Building on that, Echo, the idea that state actors would tap into this network, that takes us directly to unholy alliance, the church and state security services. I mean, what kind of cooperation are we talking about here? Was it overt, covert? Were the church leaders aware of what was happening?
Well, Cypher, the document really goes deep into this. It's not just about the church being an unwitting tool, if you will. It highlights a very deliberate cooperation. Governments found immense value in these church networks, both for what they call soft power initiatives and, critically, for outright clandestine activities.
Soft power, I get. Like, if you're a government trying to, spread influence or goodwill, having a globally trusted religious organization on your side is pretty powerful. They can effectively be cultural ambassadors, right?
Exactly. They're building bridges, fostering positive relationships, subtly influencing opinions in favor of, the state or its ideals, all under the banner of religious outreach or humanitarian work. It's a very effective way to project influence without resorting to military might or overt political maneuvering.
But then you have clandestine activities. That's a whole different ballgame. That suggests much deeper involvement than just, being a friendly face.
It does. And this is where it gets really murky. The document mentions declassified files and testimonies that reveal how church leaders often shared intelligence with these state agencies. This wasn't just a one-way street of governments exploiting the church. It suggests a reciprocal relationship.
Reciprocal? So what were the church leaders getting in return for
essentially being like an arm of intelligence for the state?
Great question. The document outlines 3 key things: financial support, protection, and influence in policy decisions. So for the church, it was a transactional relationship, it seems. They provided valuable intelligence, and in return, they got resources and leverage.
Financial support. That makes sense. Running a global organization, especially one involved in extensive missionary and humanitarian work, costs a phenomenal amount of money. If a government is willing to subsidize that in exchange for intelligence, that's a pretty compelling offer.
Absolutely. It's a way to keep the lights on, expand operations, fund new projects, all while deepening their reach and influence. And it creates this dependency, too, where the church becomes reliant on that state support.
And protection. What kind of protection are we talking about? Like against hostile governments in other countries, or even internal threats?
Both, potentially. Imagine a church operating in a sensitive, perhaps hostile region. State protection could mean ensuring their missionaries aren't, detained or expelled. It could mean diplomatic leverage when they encounter issues. Or it could even mean protection from rival religious groups or political factions that might view their activities as a threat.
So the state essentially offers a shield. That's a huge incentive, especially for an organization with a global footprint and members in potentially dangerous areas.
It is. And then there's the influence in policy decisions, which I think is perhaps the most intriguing. This isn't just about money or safety. This is about power, about shaping the world according to their own agenda or the agenda they're aligned with.
So church leaders could go to, say, a high-ranking government official and say, we have this information from X region, and based on that, we think policy Y would be beneficial, knowing that their information holds weight because it's coming from their intelligence network. That's a lot of power.
It's immense, and it speaks to the deep level of trust and integration that must have existed between these entities. It wasn't just like a casual exchange of information. It was a strategic partnership where the church's unique access and network were leveraged at the highest levels of statecraft.
I mean, how formalized was this? Was it like official meetings or more like back-channel conversations in, dimly lit rooms?
The document doesn't go into specifics about the exact mechanisms, but the use of terms like cooperation, declassified files, and testimonies suggests a formal, structured relationship. It wasn't just ad hoc. This was a recognized avenue for intelligence exchange.
So essentially, state security services got to outsource a significant portion of their intelligence gathering to an organization that already had legitimate reasons to be in virtually any corner of the globe. And the church got, funding, protection, and a seat at the table. It's a very cynical but efficient arrangement.
It really is, and it raises all sorts of questions about the integrity of religious missions themselves. If the primary goal, or at least a significant underlying goal, is to gather intelligence, does that invalidate the good works being done? Or is it simply a pragmatic reality of operating in a complex world?
And it also, makes you wonder about the specific individuals involved. Were the missionaries on the ground aware that the information they were collecting, however innocently, was being funneled to intelligence agencies? Or were they just, reporting back to headquarters, trusting that the information would be used for, good?
That's a crucial point, and it's likely varied. Some might have been fully witting agents, trained and directed. Others might have been genuinely devoted missionaries whose observations were simply aggregated and analyzed by handlers higher up the chain. The document highlights the church's structure, which allowed it to function as both a religious body and a hub for intelligence. that implies a system designed for this dual purpose.
Yeah, so it's not just a few rogue elements. It's built into the very fabric of the organization's global operations. That's a pretty sophisticated setup. I mean, it's not easy to run an intelligence network that spans continents and, integrates so seamlessly with legitimate humanitarian efforts.
No, it's incredibly complex. And the fact that declassified files are now, shedding light on this speaks volumes. It wasn't just speculation or conspiracy theories. There's documented evidence of these partnerships.
So it's almost like the perfect intelligence apparatus because it's self-sustaining, it has plausible deniability, and it's operating with the public's trust already established. Any government would kill for that kind of asset.
They absolutely would. And the sheer breadth of information they could collect, it wasn't just about, military secrets. It was about social stability, economic indicators, the mood of the populace, the emergence of political dissidents. All of that is gold for a state trying to understand and influence global events.
And it explains why governments would be so willing to offer financial support and protection because the value of that intelligence and that soft power influence far outweighed the cost. It's a strategic investment.
Precisely. It's a long-term investment in maintaining an intelligence pipeline and a global influence network that no single government could easily replicate on its own. It's fascinating and, frankly, a little disturbing how deeply intertwined faith and espionage became.
And the ethical implications here are just immense. I mean, if you're a devout follower, supporting your church, contributing to its missions, and then you find out it's also, engaged in, intelligence gathering for a state, that's a huge breach of trust.
It absolutely is. And it can erode faith, not just in that particular organization, but in humanitarian efforts globally. It casts a shadow on the motivations of anyone offering aid or religious guidance.
That trust element is huge, Echo. And it leads us right into global reach, case studies of church-led intelligence campaigns. Because it's one thing to talk about, a general partnership, but what were some of the actual operations? Like, where did this intelligence gathering really happen?
This is where it gets really concrete, Cypher. The document provides some compelling examples that really drive home the global scope of these operations. We're talking about real-world scenarios, not just hypothetical arrangements.
Okay, so give us some examples. What's the first one that jumps out?
Well, one of the primary areas highlighted is Cold War activities in Eastern Europe. Think about it. A seemingly benign religious organization present behind the Iron Curtain where traditional intelligence agencies would have faced immense scrutiny.
Right, because a spy from, say, the US or the UK would immediately be under suspicion. But a missionary or a priest, they're there for spiritual reasons, ostensibly. That's brilliant cover, actually.
Exactly. They could establish networks, gather information, and communicate back all under the radar. They're interacting with local populations, hearing grievances, observing social dynamics, even identifying potential dissent. This was invaluable during the Cold War.
So it wasn't just about, military secrets or troop movements. It was more about the human intelligence, the pulse of the nation.
Precisely. It was about understanding the societal fabric, identifying opposition movements, gauging public sentiment against the communist regimes, information that could be used for psychological warfare, for political leverage, or even for supporting covert operations.
Wow. So they were essentially like embedded analysts reporting on the mood of the people, and governments then used that to shape their strategies.
Yeah, exactly. And then moving beyond Eastern Europe, the document also brings up Latin America, specifically the monitoring of dissidents there.
Ah, so a completely different geopolitical context, but a similar tactic. During the Cold War, Latin America was, a hotbed of political upheaval, coups, counter-coups, ideological struggles.
Absolutely. And again, the church, with its deep roots in Latin American communities, had unparalleled access. Missionaries and aid workers would be present in remote villages, urban slums, places where governments were struggling to maintain control, and dissidents were often organizing.
So they could observe who was meeting whom, what pamphlets were being circulated, what the local grievances were that were fueling unrest, and then feed that back.
Yeah, and this information could be crucial for governments trying to suppress these movements, or conversely for those trying to support them, depending on whose side the church was aligned with. It's a very murky ethical area, for sure.
Yeah, it's like, were they helping oppressive regimes, or were they helping governments counter movements that were deemed a threat to national security? It really depends on your perspective, I guess.
It does. And the document doesn't shy away from that ambiguity. It just lays out that this was happening. And then beyond Latin America, it also mentions information gathering in Africa and Asia.
So literally, global reach. It wasn't just like a regional anomaly. This was a consistent modus operandi.
That's the takeaway. These church organizations were actively gathering intelligence across continents. In Africa, for instance, they'd be observing emerging political movements, tribal dynamics, resource conflicts. In Asia, perhaps monitoring religious minorities or political dissent in authoritarian states.
It really makes you think about how many quote-unquote humanitarian organizations might have similar layers to their operations, because the access they gain is just so profound. People trust them. They're not seen as a threat necessarily.
And that trust is precisely what makes them such effective intelligence assets. People open up to a priest, a nun, a relief worker, in ways they never would to a government official or a suspected spy. That's their secret weapon, almost.
And they're collecting like all this raw, unfiltered intelligence directly from the ground level. It's not filtered through diplomatic channels or official reports. It's like pure human intel.
It is, and the document emphasizes that these operations demonstrate the global scope of the church's activities. It wasn't isolated incidents. It was a systemic approach to leveraging their vast network for intelligence purposes.
So this church, from its origins, had this dual function, almost built into its DNA. It expanded globally, yes, as a religious body, but also as this incredibly efficient intelligence-gathering apparatus.
That's the argument being made, that its structure inherently allowed for both. The missionaries, the aid workers, the cultural attachés, they weren't just spiritual guides or charitable individuals. They were, in effect, intelligence collectors, often seamlessly blending into foreign societies because their cover was so strong.
So it's not like the CIA suddenly decided to, start a church. It was more like an existing global organization had a structure that governments realized could be incredibly useful for their intelligence needs.
Precisely. Governments didn't need to reinvent the wheel. They just needed to tap into an existing, well-established, and trusted network. And from the church's perspective, as we discussed, there were clear benefits to this cooperation: financial support, protection, and political influence.
So it was a symbiotic relationship. However unsettling it might seem, the church got to expand its reach and influence, perhaps even protecting its members in difficult regions, while governments got unparalleled intelligence.
It's a very pragmatic, if ethically complicated, arrangement. And these case studies really bring that to life. You can almost picture these, quiet reports being filed, observations being made in unassuming settings, all feeding into larger strategic analyses back home.
And it would be hard to detect, wouldn't it? because if someone's genuinely doing humanitarian work or genuinely spreading a religious message, it would be almost impossible to differentiate that from someone who's also, passively or actively gathering intelligence.
Extremely difficult, and that's why this model was so effective and, frankly, so appealing to intelligence agencies. It's the ultimate form of plausible deniability. Oh, we were just, helping people in need.
Yeah, we were just providing medical aid in a remote village, and naturally we observed the local political dynamics.
Right? And who's going to question that? It's a very clever, very sophisticated way to conduct intelligence operations on a global scale. It's chilling, actually, when you think about it.
It is. And the sheer breadth of it, the fact that it spans the Cold War, Latin America, Africa, Asia, shows it wasn't just a fleeting partnership. This was a sustained, widespread effort over decades.
Absolutely. It highlights a long-term strategy and a recognition by multiple state actors, presumably, of the unique asset that this church network represented.
Echo, we've talked about the origins, the covert operations, the state links, and now these global case studies. It's a lot to take in. But all of this, it inherently brings up some really profound ethical and moral questions. And that's what this final segment, Faith and Espionage, the ethical dilemma, really tackles.
Yeah, absolutely, Cypher, because you can't discuss a topic like this without confronting the moral implications. It's the elephant in the room, right? On one hand, you have faith and humanitarian work, and on the other, espionage. And how do those two things even coexist, let alone merge?
Exactly. So what are the primary arguments from the critics of this kind of dual identity? Because I can already imagine some of them.
The document makes it very clear. Critics, they argue that using religious cover for intelligence work fundamentally undermines trust, not just in that specific church, but in humanitarian organizations across the board.
Oh, I can totally see that. If people know that, a church group or an aid worker might actually be reporting back to a government, then how do you trust any charity or any missionary? It taints the whole well.
Precisely. It erodes the very foundation of trust that these organizations rely on to operate effectively, especially in sensitive or conflict zones. If locals suddenly suspect that the people providing food or medical care are also intelligence assets, they're going to shut down.
And that trust is essential for, their actual legitimate humanitarian mission. It's not just about intelligence, it's about helping people, too.
Exactly. And it creates a huge danger, actually, for genuine missionaries. If every religious worker is now under suspicion of being a spy, it puts their lives at risk, especially in hostile environments where, foreign presence is already viewed with skepticism.
So if a genuine missionary is kidnapped or targeted, it could be because of the actions of these intelligence-gathering church groups. They're paying the price for someone else's covert activities.
That's the argument. It essentially paints a target on the backs of people who are truly there for spiritual or charitable reasons, making their work much more perilous. It's like, you're ruining it for everyone else.
It really complicates the definition of humanitarian aid, doesn't it? What is the true motive here? Is it genuinely helping, or is it a means to an end for intelligence?
It totally blurs the lines. And it makes you wonder if, any good that was done by the intelligence gathering outweighed the potential harm done to the integrity of humanitarian work and the safety of genuine aid workers.
So those are the critics, but the document also mentions the defenders. How do they justify these actions? Because there has to be a counter-argument, right?
Oh, absolutely. The defenders claim it was absolutely necessary to protect national interests, especially, and this is key,
during volatile geopolitical times.
Okay, so it's a means to an end argument. Like, we had to do it for the greater good of national security.
Yeah, exactly. They would argue that in periods of intense global tension, like the Cold War, or when dealing with emerging threats, traditional intelligence methods might not have been sufficient or effective enough. The church network offered a unique, unparalleled access that couldn't be replicated.
So it's a utilitarian argument. The security of the nation, or perhaps the prevention of larger conflicts, justified the ethical compromise.
That's the core of it. They might say, look, we were in a time of extreme danger. We needed every possible tool to gather information, to understand our adversaries, to predict movements, and ultimately to protect our citizens. They see it as a necessary evil, almost.
It's that classic dilemma, isn't it? The ends justifying the means. Is it acceptable to use a religious or humanitarian cover if it's for, what's perceived as national survival?
And it's not an easy question to answer because, when you're looking at geopolitical stability or preventing a major conflict, the stakes are incredibly high. From their perspective, perhaps, the risks to genuine missionaries, while tragic, were seen as a regrettable but necessary consequence.
And they would argue that the intelligence gathered, maybe it prevented a larger war or destabilized an enemy. And that, in turn, saved countless lives that a, more ethically pure approach might not have.
That's the line. And it's not just about preventing conflict. It could also be about understanding social dynamics to predict mass movements or to counter ideological adversaries more effectively. Information is power, and sometimes, you need unconventional methods to get it.
So it comes down to what you prioritize, doesn't it? Is it the absolute purity of the humanitarian mission and the safety of individuals, or is it the broader national security interest? And I guess different people will draw that line in different places.
Absolutely. And the document doesn't take a side, really. It just lays out these two very strong opposing viewpoints, highlighting the complexity of this dual identity. It really forces you to grapple with these uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, because it's easy to say, oh, that's wrong from a distance. But if you're a government official in the midst of a Cold War facing existential threats, your calculus might be very different. Your priorities shift. And frankly, it forces us to reconsider what we think we know about international relations and intelligence. It's not always clean. It's not always by the book. Sometimes, you have to look for creative solutions. And the most creative solutions are often the ones that leverage existing trusted networks that would never be suspected. And the church in this case certainly fit that bill.
Totally. It's a testament to the ingenuity of intelligence operations, but also a very sobering look at the moral compromises that sometimes get made in the name of national security.
Yeah, it really puts a new spin on the phrase, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't it?
Ooh, wow. Cypher. That's a mic drop right there.
Echo, this has been quite the journey today, exploring how a spiritual movement could, become this expansive intelligence network. It really challenges a lot of our preconceptions.
Yeah, it really does, Cypher. The idea that something as fundamental as faith, something meant to bring people together, could also be, leveraged for espionage. It's a lot to process, and it leaves you with more questions than answers, I think.
Absolutely, and the ethical tightrope walk, too. The critics and the defenders both making compelling points about, trust and national interest. It just highlights how gray these areas really are.
It makes you think about the true cost of information, doesn't it? And what lines are crossed when security is deemed paramount. It's not just a historical footnote. These are timeless dilemmas, I think.
For sure. And we hope for all of you listening to Redacted Frequencies today that we've given you something to chew on, something to think about long after this episode ends.
We certainly hope so. And hey, if you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us bring more of these deep dives and untold stories to you.
Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep digging into these fascinating, often redacted frequencies.
Indeed. And speaking of digging, you won't want to miss our next episode of Redacted Frequencies. We're going even deeper into another secretive world.
That's right. Join us next time for Inside Skull and Bones, What They Swear Never to Reveal. They're ready for that.
It's going to be a wild one. So from Cypher
And Echo.
thanks for tuning in to Redacted Frequencies. We'll see you next time.